It can event. Yeah.
Hey, Paul, I'm super excited to have you back on the podcast. Well, actually, you haven't been on the podcast before, but you were the first person I ever did this with, where we recorded a conversation and then we posted it to Facebook. So how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Yeah, doing good.
You know, I was riding my bike one day and I was like, man, we got to do something about people taking COVID seriously. And I was like, I know my friend Paul, he's on the front lines of this work. And so let's just record a conversation and um, get it get it out on Facebook. And now since then, we've kind of from that and from some other conversations has built this we've built Community Spread, the podcast. And so I wanted to have you back on to talk about that experience and to also compare your experience as you went to New York caring for COVID patients and to what you're experiencing now as you're caring for COVID patients here in Utah. So first off, tell me what you do and how you're helping COVID patients.
Well, I am a nurse practitioner. Specifically, I'm an acute care nurse practitioner, which specifically takes care of patients that have acute medical problems. My role right now is that I do 2 days a week in an internal medicine primary care clinic, and then I do 2 days a week in the respiratory ICU at Intermountain Medical Center. And so, yeah, I'm a old ICU nurse, and then became a practitioner, and here I am. So all of us, regardless of kind of our specialty these days, have been turned into COVID providers. We've been forced into a new specialty. So regardless,
and what area, what city are you in right now?
I'm in Salt Lake.
Salt Lake.
Yeah. So
right at the heart of it.
Yep.
Here, where the most cases certainly are.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of the pandemic, you obviously there was a need for providers in New York. You decided to take that on and go to New York. Recap that experience for us and what that was like.
Yeah, so Intermountain saw that there was a large need of essentially relief workers in New York City. New York was getting pounded. They were kind of the first place in the States that really had a large uptick in COVID cases, and they quickly overwhelmed their healthcare system in New York City and Long Island. And so Intermountain Healthcare decided that they needed to send people to help with that situation. Volunteered for that and was chosen to go out, and I spent 2 weeks at Long Island Jewish Medical Center working with critically ill COVID patients as a nurse practitioner. Just to kind of give a little bit of a background of what was going on at Long Island Jewish Hospital. It's a hospital that's not unlike Intermountain Medical Center in Murray, has roughly about the same amount of beds, licensed beds as IMC. They have maybe 100 more beds, which is not really that many more. So their patient population normally is about 590 patients. When we got there, every single bed was full. In fact, they had doubled their patient load. So they were over 900 patients. They had shut down all elective surgeries. In fact, every single patient was being treated for COVID. So there were 900 patients in the hospital being treated for COVID. I think they said when we got there, it was something like 85% of the patients were COVID positive and 15% were rule out. And they had like 100% positivity rate with the patients that were being admitted, which was kind of crazy. I was working in makeshift COVID ICUs. It was, post anesthesia unit where patients go to recover from surgery. They shut that down and just turned it into an ICU. So it was ward style, beds along the wall. Everybody was ventilated. Everybody was critically ill. And I spent time there. They had
how many? So how many? You're talking about post-op room, I'm just trying to get a visual of this. What does that look like? How big is this room, and how many patients
So
are lying on beds in these rooms?
so in that room, it's like a ward. So if you think of like old time hospital beds, right? Not the beds themselves, but just the way that they laid out hospital wards, where it was just like a big room with beds along a wall and patients in those beds. It was similar to that. And that's how a post anesthesia unit works. And the way that what happens is they come out of the OR, their anesthesia is reversed, they're recovered, and they usually spend just an hour there, and then they go to their normal room. And they had they had stopped doing surgeries, and so what they were actually doing here was just keeping patients in these beds long term. So the idea of
How
like,
many people are in one of those rooms? I guess I'm thinking of my post-op room. There's like 10 beds in there when I come out of a knee
yeah,
surgery or
it was
something.
like a 32 bed unit split to two sides, so it was like 16 beds per side, and it was run as two different ICUs. So you had an A side and a B side, and I was on I think I was on the B side, so I had 16 patients that I was over,
Whoa.
approximately, if I can remember correctly. And there
16
was,
patients that were kind of your responsibility?
yeah, so and then what they had done is that they had taken every physician, whether they were a resident, intern, or an attending physician, regardless of their specialty, was now a COVID provider. And this ICU had me and two resident physicians, so physicians that are still kind of in their training as physicians, and we were responsible for these 16 patients. Now, these residents weren't internal medicine residents; they weren't critical care or intensivists or even pulmonologists. One was, I think he was an ear, nose, throat resident, and one was a radiologist. So
Oh
these guys
my.
are not, and that's the way it was
So,
everywhere.
so you have by far the most intensive care, the most training
Yeah,
of either of these two other providers that you're
yeah.
working with.
Even as a nurse practitioner, not a physician, like I was essentially teaching these physicians like ventilator management and like hemodynamic management and those types of things while I was there. So kind of crazy that way. And everybody was just kind of recruited. It's like, you have a medical degree, you are now a COVID like doctor, total battlefield style stuff. And so I was there for 10 total shifts. I had multiple codes every single shift. At times I was running two codes at a time. I remember one specific event where it was like I was running two codes, two patients right next to each other. Their heart
And
had stopped, and I
a
was trying
code
to
is basically someone's dying.
yeah, someone's dying. Their heart stopped. They stopped breathing, and we're doing compressions on them, which is very brutal in real life. Like the media and TV kind of make it look like it's this like pretty thing, but it's not. It's just hellacious. And I was running two of those, so I was the person in charge. And these doctors were so overwhelmed. One of them was just crying in the corner because she had been doing this for so long, and the other one was running another code. And so I was trying to take care of two patients at once and trying to give orders and keep things straight. And that's just kind of the way that it was. For 10 shifts, I think I signed 16 death certificates while I was there. So I had multiple deaths per shift.
And
It was
when you're working in an ICU, normally at your normal patient load, how many deaths would you see on 10 shifts in a normal non-COVID time?
0 to 1.
Man.
Yeah. And the thing that was the worst about this is we can't have anybody in there. We can't have their family in there. These people are dying alone, or they're dying with people that they don't know. And that's hard on the families. But I wasn't one of the families. I was a healthcare provider, and that's hard on us. We gain a lot of closure as healthcare providers when someone dies, being able to have family members in there and being able to have the family members of our patients just view how we're trying to save someone's life. That is protective for our own emotional well-being. and I'm not trying to minimize the effect that this had on families. I mean, this is like disastrous to them and a nightmare for sure. But you know, it has an effect on us as well. And it just was, I don't think there was one shift that I left the hospital not in tears.
Oh
You
my.
know, it just seeing that much death that often over and over and over, it just kind of wrecks you and wrecks your
And
mental health, really.
and in a way that you're not used to, like
Yeah,
you
for
said,
sure.
with the families not being there and the suffering and the contemplation of all of that,
Yeah,
um, is just that's a lot to think about, and it's a lot
yeah.
on you. Um, so at that time, how many patients had you treated previously? How many patients have you treated for COVID in Utah at that time?
At that time, I hadn't been in the ICU treating COVID patients. I walked right into that. Before this, I was working as an internal medicine primary care provider. I had kind of gotten out of the ICU, working in a clinic, and I was
Oh,
just kind of thrust right back into it. Which, I mean, I'm an old ICU nurse. Like, I thrive on the adrenaline of a hairy situation, you know, and I like to kind of brag to myself that, like, you could have two legs in the coffin and I'll drag you out and send you home and you'll be fine, you know. But this was altogether something different. You know, these, at that time, we just didn't know what we didn't know. And right now we know a little bit more, but we still don't know what we don't know. I mean, we're still learning.
tell me about that experience of treating something that you'd never seen before, you'd never learned about in school, you'd never practiced.
Yeah.
What was that like?
I mean, we were just basically like throwing things at them, you know, like there was some data that showed, you know, that hydrochloroquine was a good drug for these patients, and that, you know, these immunomodulators such as tocilizumab and stuff were good for patients, and we were just kind of throwing those things at them, and then we were just treating them symptomatically, you know, like, this is a patient that has acute respiratory distress, we're going to treat them like that. But it wasn't acting in a way that we normally expect acute respiratory distress to act. And so our ventilator settings are being maxed out, and we're still not getting good oxygenation or ventilation on these patients. And, you know, just the pressures that we're having to drive into these patients' lungs are like causing trauma to their lungs with the pressure that we had to get just to get air in their lungs. And then, you know, they were getting, it, it's like walking into your worst nightmare and not knowing what to do. Yeah, like, I often think about, like, when you have a nightmare when you're a kid, you know, you walk into school and you're naked and you didn't study for the test, and you're like, oh crap, you know, and then you wake up and you're like, oh my heck, that was horrible. Oh, that was real life for us, you know, minus the fact that we weren't naked. Like, we were just walking into, like, we haven't studied for this, we have no idea what we're doing here, we're just trying to keep people alive, and we're just not doing a good job about that. And that, like, we're educated to keep people alive, like, and if we're not, like, that hurts, you know what I mean? That just is like a twist in the heart. So you know, it was rough. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, wow, that's a really good way of putting it. We've all had one of those dreams. Yeah. But with real life circumstances and people's lives on the line, I can only imagine what that was like.
yeah,
So you make it through that experience. You come home to your family. You're COVID free. You didn't end
yep,
up with COVID during that
yeah,
time. What was your PPE like, and how were you staying
yeah. So
protected?
we wore N95s and face masks on top of the N95s, and face shields and gowns and gloves for 12 to 16 hours a day, with minimal breaks from our PPE. You know, we had really good access to PPE while we were there. Northwell Health, which runs Long Island Jewish, did an amazing job at taking care of us and keeping us safe.
Are you used to working in that much PPE? And what was that like?
No, I mean, my experience as a bedside nurse, I was a post-surgical ICU nurse, and so these people aren't infected with things; they've just been cut up, you know. And so I'm not used to like wearing a mask and gown and face shields for long periods of time. But you quickly get used to it, and you quickly get used to the fact that like everything's hot. Those masks are hot, and you're just kind of like breathing in your own humidity, and it's just uncomfortable. And so I have a real problem when someone says that they can't wear like a procedural mask or like a cloth mask out in the real world and say, oh, I can't breathe. It's like, no, try doing compressions with an N95 and you're fine. You know what I mean?
You'll be
So
fine. That's a feeling
yeah,
of uncomfortableness, not
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. There's a difference between being uncomfortable and like, I don't know, actually like not being able to breathe. And most people
Yeah.
don't know the difference, and they like to make an excuse. It's like, come on. this
Right.
is what we do, and it's fine. We all survived and we all did fine. And yeah, I came home from New York COVID free. Thankfully, I had 2 COVID tests and an antibody test a couple of times just to make sure that I didn't contract it and then got better and didn't know it. And I've had several COVID tests since then, and I haven't contracted it. And so I have a lot of faith in what we know about COVID and how to prevent getting it and things like that. And I continue to work with COVID patients in the ICU. And when I got home, Intermount was like, okay, you had this experience in New York, and now go. We want you to continue to work with COVID patients. And that's where I've been since.
So, I mean, for a long time, Utah was relatively unaffected or less affected, I should say,
Yeah.
by COVID infections. As we've seen over the last month or two, it really, really grow. What has it been like being a provider for COVID patients as you've seen it grow during that time?
Yeah. So, like we were talking before we kind of started recording this, like I'd like people to kind of understand that, it's doing us as healthcare providers a little bit of a disfavor to say that we're starting to become stressed here in Utah. I mean, we've been stressed this whole time, not to the effect or to the level of New York, thankfully. Excuse me. But we've been stressed, and it's just getting worse. And we have the stress of caring for these patients and then coming home to our families and still worrying.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. So maybe I was really wrong in that. I mean, I kind of said like we have been minorly affected, but you're the one providing for those few that were affected, even during the time when the media was kind of downplaying it all and like things in Utah are super good, we're fine, everything's fine. During that time, you're treating patients all along the way, right?
Yeah. I was in the ICU caring for critical COVID patients the whole time. And, I can't say that. I mean, I understand that our numbers weren't super high, but we still had a higher census in our ICUs than we normally do through the summer. Most of them were COVID patients, and it wasn't a normal time for those patients, and it wasn't a normal time for their families, and it wasn't a mild time for us as ICU providers, nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians, respiratory therapists, techs. It was hard for us the whole time caring for these patients. And continually trying to keep people alive with a disease that we still know very little about. And we're learning every day how to care for these patients, and we're getting better at it, but it's still hard. I like to tell people, we've got decades worth of understanding of how to treat heart failure, or I don't know, pick a disease that's pretty well known. We have 11 months of understanding on how to treat COVID. Like we really don't know a lot about this right now. And so, thankfully there's a lot of good studies that are coming out really frequently about it and how to treat patients, and we're getting better, but we're still not perfect.
So what's the growth like for you as a practitioner as we go from, a couple hundred cases a day to a couple thousand cases a day? What does that look like around you and for the staff at the hospital and the patients there?
It's scary for us because traditionally in the winter, our ICU numbers go up. Flu every year hits patients that are immunocompromised, and we typically run about 90% full in our ICUs through the winter months. Well, now throw a global pandemic on that, and we're like, we're kind of like, we're scared about how we're going to take care of these patients, and then we're also scared how are we going to just because there's COVID doesn't mean that the flu's not around. It doesn't mean that that COPD is not being exacerbated in patients, and it doesn't mean that patients aren't getting normally sick that normally would get sick anyway. We have to give them care as well. We can't just say, oh, sorry, did you know there's a pandemic? Yeah, so wait a minute, maybe in the summer we'll take care of you. No, they need care too. And so the way that this looks at Intermountain anyway is that we're repurposing providers that work in in like primary care situations and other specialties, and repurposing them like we did in New York. You're now a COVID patient or a COVID provider. And LDS Hospital recently increased their ICU bed capacity so that they could accept more COVID patients. And we have contingency plans at Intermountain Medical Center to shut down units and repurpose them as COVID ICUs like they did in New York. And we're trying to balance our COVID patients across the entire system so that the tide of COVID rises evenly for all of everybody. And we don't just have pockets that are, Intermountain Medical Center is super high, but Riverton Hospital's not, or McKay-D is not. We're trying to
This
have
was a
everybody
problem
rise at the
they
same
had in
time.
New York.
Yeah,
From what
sure.
I understand, is they had certain hospitals that were completely slammed, and others that that had some beds, but they couldn't move them, or they built this big hospital with beds, but for some reason they couldn't transfer them over there. And so it sounds like
Yeah,
Utah's learned something from that, or IHC has, and they're
yeah,
working on balancing that. That's really important. We don't think about that kind of
yeah,
infrastructure that it takes to deal with this many sick people.
yeah, yeah. And the way that we treat patients now is a little bit different. We're seeing better success rates. When I was in New York, if you were sick enough that you needed a ventilator, 80% of the patients died that were on a ventilator. If you got so sick that your kidney shut down and you needed to be put on dialysis, 97% of those patients died. I mean, that's a 3% survival rate. I mean, come on, that's incredibly horrible. You know what I mean? And to have a 20% survival rate with a ventilator, I mean, come on.
I
But
can't even
now
imagine, like yeah, I can even imagine you're in a room full of people on ventilators and you kind of know those odds. Like, that's
yeah.
tough work. Tell me do we have statistics on how those odds have shifted?
Just anecdotally, I don't have the exact numbers at the moment, and so don't quote me on this, but from what
Right.
I'm seeing is that we're seeing about 80% survival rate of patients when they get put on a ventilator, and we're seeing about a
Wow.
50% survival rate when they have to go onto continuous dialysis. And that's just to be expected, right? That's like the scientific method. You learn, you adapt, you change, you try something new. Oh, hey, that works, let's keep doing that. People think that science is like, oh, well, the textbook says this. No, that's not science. Science is, oh crap, we don't know, and right now we don't know a lot, and so we're trying different things, and we're finding certain things work and certain things don't, and as we learn, we do different things, and we're getting better success rates with that. But it's not
I
to
mean,
say,
you say it's expected, but I say it's miraculous and shows the, your guys' work and the ability to I think a lot of doctoring is algorithmic in a lot of cases, but now you guys
Hmm.
are thinking on your feet and being almost innovative in treatments and
Yeah,
care, and that's a different kind of doctoring and shows the talent and the skill of the providers like yourself and others around you.
yeah. Yeah, and just to kind of give credit where credit's due, every single day we have Intermountain's infectious disease uh, doctors on the phone with our intensive care physicians and nurse practitioners, and we go over every single patient that is COVID positive, and we talk about their care. What can we do differently? What is the data showing us? What new research is coming out? How can we adapt to what we're seeing? And we're individualizing care with every single patient. This is done on a daily basis.
You mean you're
You know,
not just like cruising Facebook to try to get tips?
I mean, I wish. I mean, that would be so much. WebMD, I heard, is like super good, but it's just telling me everybody has cancer, and I don't think that's actually the case. No, but our infectious disease team at Intermountain is just amazing, and so are all of our other providers. I mean, we're truly trying to do the best by people and doing the greatest amount of good for the most amount of people that we can. And this is a group effort. It's a team. I can't and it's coming down to the fact that like what I learned in nursing school when I was a bedside nurse, like those things matter, like making sure that we're doing oral care to our ventilated patients so that they don't get ventilator associated like infections, that's huge. And making sure that we're keeping them turned when they're on a ventilator so that they don't get bed sores, those things are huge because those things come back to bite you, like, and that's why we don't want to become overwhelmed because those little things have
Mm.
big impact. And we're starting to get to the point where we're becoming overwhelmed. And that's what's so scary about this.
Oof.
Because in New York, we didn't have time to do the little things. And I think that had a lot to do with why we didn't see not everything. I mean, we still didn't understand how to treat the disease, but once you get so far behind the eight ball, like it's just impossible to catch up.
I
And,
hadn't thought a lot about that.
you
You're
know,
saying like the things that come back to bite you if you get, because of the ventilator and you're not doing proper oral care, you get a secondary infection or you get a bed sore with a secondary infection, and that
right.
complicates the disease and leads you to go downhill. And if you get overwhelmed, those things start to catch up and get behind you, and you can't do all the little things that maybe all and a lot of all these little things is what adding up to your success rate.
Yeah, for sure. An ICU nurse generally takes care of 1 to 2 patients. They're responsible for 1 to 2 patients. In New York, ICU nurses were taking care of 4, 5, 6 patients at a time. How are you actively like trying to do oral care and turn them and to do all the little things when you have 6 patients? You just can't. So you kind of have to make these decisions. What can I do and what can't I do? And we haven't gotten to that point yet in Utah, but we're starting to. And that's scary. Yeah, we can have all the data in the world as a provider, but if you can't give the basic care needs, like we're going to start to see people start to die again, I think.
Oh, yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about was Utah's death rate seems to be lower than other areas around the country, where
Yeah.
last I checked, like about 0.5% of
Yeah.
people that are getting diagnosed with COVID are dying from it. What are you contributing that to? Is it because we got it later? Is it what else could that be?
I mean, it's because we learned from the mistakes in the big population centers of New York. It's we have better logistical plans. We've had time to prepare these plans. It's better bedside care. It's better understanding of what drugs actually work and which drugs don't. It's kind of all of the above. But what happens in like a disaster, the little things start to overwhelm you, and then we start to see this cascade effect. And so thankfully we've been able to continue to do the little things, and it's been hard work for our providers and our nurses and our respiratory therapists. They've been working hard to stay up on the little things, and we see the effect of that in our low death rate, which is amazing, miraculous.
Miraculous.
But as just the way that this is going to go is that we're seeing these high numbers, and 7 to 10 days later they come to the hospital, and then a certain percentage of them, and then about 5 days, 3 to 5 days after that, a certain percentage of those people develop severe disease and they go to the ICU. And then we start, and as the numbers go up, those percentages, they still stay about the same. It's like so many percent get to the hospital and so many of those become critical and so on. But when you have 3,000 people that have been diagnosed with COVID, that's more people. Like, that percentage is still, so many, but that just equals more people and that's going to overwhelm our system.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the math can kind of be done, right? Like, I mean, like, we had 2,300 cases today, and if it's a 0.5%, that's at least 11 people, 10, 11, somewhere in that range. So 10, 11 people got a death sentence today. 10, 11 people got a death sentence today, and that's
the respiratory ICU is like, I think we have 18 beds in the respiratory ICU. In one day we could fill, in 2 days we could fill that, with, what I mean? And every single ICU is full now. We're creating new ICUs, but I mean, we're going to fill those. The number is just the math, the arithmetic shows that we will fill those, and we're going to have to start doing, disaster care essentially, and it's coming soon. And, back in June and July, August, September, I kept thinking, this is coming. We're not there yet, but this is coming. I was like, please, just praying. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But, now we're getting these like numbers, and I wasn't wrong. Unfortunately, I like being wrong, because that means that, because I usually try to plan for the worst, and if I'm wrong, that's a good thing, right?
Because you're a scientist.
Yeah.
If you're wrong, you'll just learn from it and move on.
Yeah. So,
tell me, you talk about the staff and it being hard on you. What's it like in the break room? As you guys shed the PPE for a minute and sit there, and like, what is it like? What are you guys experiencing together?
The beautiful thing about the ICU, and especially my time as a bedside nurse, is that I knew that I could count on my brothers and sister nurses. You know what I mean? Like, I knew that they had my back, and I knew, hey, if my patient codes, I'm going to get all of my coworkers and my colleagues in there to help me take care of this patient. And that's similar to what's going on now. Like, I trust these people with everything, and as we kind of sit around and take breaks and stuff, it's just, I haven't ever been in the military, but I kind of assume it would be similar to what soldiers feel when there's a break in battle, just like a collective sigh of relief, and then just a lot of camaraderie. And that's kind of how we kind of feel as well. These people become really close to each other, and for me it's a little different, because I'm not permanently in that role of a COVID provider. I'm kind of redeployed, and I'm doing this part-time, just 2 days a week. But, even still, like, I've become really close to people that I didn't think I would ever become close to. And I can, I feel like I can trust these guys. I mean, it's amazing in a good way.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's it like? No families are allowed still in and around the hospital and the ICU. So what's it like interacting with the families? How do you tell them about updates of their patient's condition or their loved one's condition? And how is that not doing that in person when you're used to doing that in person?
Yeah. So I'm just coming off of paternity leave, and I've been away from everything for about 3 weeks, and I've had this like wonderful break from like the reality of hell,
Congratulations, by the way. We were going to do this 3 weeks ago, but then you had a baby. So
but we've kind of figured out a way that if we can see things imminently starting to decline, where we can get 2 or 3 family members into the hospital to be with their loved one, even just briefly. We put them in PPE and let them spend 10 to 15 minutes in there, and that's been really helpful for us. But to answer your question about how do we give patient family updates, after rounds and after we kind of make a plan for the day, the patients are divided up between the providers, and then we take time and just give them a call. And they get a call. Family members get a call every day, and we just let them know, look, this is kind of the changes that we're seeing. This is what we're doing to combat the problems that are starting to crop up. These are this is how things are getting better or how they're getting worse, and what our plan is to get things better, to move them back on track and so on. And some of those conversations are really hard because we pride ourselves as healthcare providers with having answers, right? And it's so hard to tell a patient's family, I don't know, things are getting better and I don't know what to do. I'm trying this and I'm trying that, and it's hard to say, we're optimistic, but we just don't know. And that takes a toll on us. It's kind of taken confidence in ourselves, and our confidence has kind of been tamped down. Our collective pride in our abilities has kind of been pushed down a little bit, if that makes sense. And it's hard on the families because they want to know and they want answers, and sometimes we're just not able to give that to them. But we try to keep the family members and the patients as connected as possible. We have a lot of iPads and tablets and stuff, and they video call as much as possible so that they can see their family member, and that helps. The way that we would do this normally is that the family member would come in, we'd sit down face to face, and we'd have a conversation with someone. And we forget that like having an in-person face-to-face conversation is not like having a Zoom meeting. You know what I mean? There's so much that's not communicated over a screen. And I
Yeah.
think that's hard. That's hard on the family members, that's hard on the patients, that's hard on us as providers and healthcare workers.
And so you did say that you're having some of the family members are able to come. You're getting a few in at a time. Are you?
Yeah, at least that's what we were
Are
doing
you trying to do that for every patient? Or are you trying to?
as well as they start to acutely decline. And that's at least that's how we were doing things about 3 weeks ago. And I haven't seen or heard
So
since
these
I've
are
been
like
out.
trying to get them in to say goodbye, or like in
Yeah, yeah, pretty much.
and well, that's hard. And you talked about how that was helpful for you
Hmm.
and the providers and the
Yeah.
staff. Tell me how and why.
There's something about humanity and just being a person and being a human, and that human connection and understanding like a familial connection, and to see someone pass away without their family is ultimately tragic. And then when we bring families in so that they're able to say goodbye to their family member, it's ultimately beautiful. Because like it or not, like we all know at some point you and I are going to die. You know what I mean? Nobody lives forever. This is a condition of mortality. You know what I mean? We're all here, we're all going to die. This is going to happen for everyone, right? And the most beautiful way to die is at home surrounded by your loved ones, right? Because that's life. You know what I mean? The most horrible way to die, in my opinion, right now is to die in an ICU without your family members, with people that you don't know, and scared, you know? And it's horrific. And I oftentimes think about the way that we use words, right? I think we don't put a lot of weight in the words that we use sometimes. But to think about the word horrific, like it is literally a horror to die alone and scared. And it's hard to watch someone die that way. And we become desensitized with like media and stuff like that, and the way and TV shows. But to see that in real time, and to see that for real, like that affects you. That affects your humanity. You know, in nursing school, we talked about like the nurse's role, and the role of a nurse is really to assist a patient to the highest level of functioning possible, or assist them in a peaceful death. And it's really hard to assist someone to a peaceful death in an ICU when they're scared and they don't know what's going on and they don't have their family around them.
Well, that definitely answered the question. I could see why that moment of having a family member come in, particularly when you had so many of these moments of them dying alone, would bring peace to you. You know, what can Utahns do right now to make your experience better, to help our fellow citizens, to help these people that are in the ICU, to help people that are dying from this?
You know, our studies are showing that masks help and that it limits the spread of COVID. And this has been such a divisive year politically and everything else. I mean, pick a topic and we're so divided. And I think that's sad. And it makes me sad when people take masks and turn that into a political statement. They're uncomfortable. They're not fun to wear. I get it. But a seatbelt is uncomfortable and it's not fun to wear. But I'm sure thankful I have it when I get in a car crash. You know what I mean? And so this is not about limiting someone's rights. This is about just caring for humanity and caring for each other and having respect for each other, regardless of what you may or may not believe. On top of that, we're seeing that the transmission right now is happening between small social groups and family units, which is really hard. Which means, you know, your Sunday dinner with mom and dad, or your family party, or the birthday party with your close friends. That's how COVID's being spread right now. It's not when you're going out to the store. Everybody wears a mask right now when they go to the store. But when you go to, you know, your in-laws' house, you take off your mask, and then all of a sudden you don't know that you're sick, and now grandma and grandpa have COVID. So, you know, I would just say now's not the time to make this a political statement, because it's not. We've had long conversations about our political ideals, and we don't agree, you know, you and I, and that's fine. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's a beautiful thing. But, you know, there's one thing that I can agree on, is that I love people. And because of my love for people, I try to stay away from them as hard as it is. And I try to wear a mask, and I try to, you know, practice good hand hygiene, and I try to do the things that I know I can do to help save people on a large scale. And so that's what I would say. You know, this is, let's come together like we did, you know, with other times and great times in humanity, you know, like with the world wars, and, you know, like everybody came together and did what they needed to do for the war effort. You know, let's have another one of those. Let's be the next greatest generation. But right now we're just like the little stepchild that, or, you know, the little spoiled brat, you know, I'm not going to wear a mask. It's like, come on, man, you know?
Yeah. And it's, you know, I think the mask is like you said, it's really important, but the hard work is not going to Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah.
The hard work is not, you know, not seeing mom and dad, and,
Yeah.
you know, and getting together with brothers and sisters, you know, and just all those things that are really important for us socially. But this, we will get through this, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there will be a time, like we will get back to that, and we have to continue to keep our heads down. And I think not just thinking about it in terms of masks, but and really admitting and talking to people, this is hard, but we can do it. And the real life consequences are all of those things that you just talked to us about.
You know, I think
The
about,
horror that you just described and you just laid out for us is the reason you shouldn't go to get together with your family members right now. And if we can picture that and we can see that, I think it will, we'll be able to get through this, and we'll be able to get on the other side and live normal lives again at some point. It will happen.
Yeah, it'll happen. I mean, we had the Spanish flu of 1918. We got through that. Lots of people died. Humanity has been through horrible times, and we've made it through. We're going to get through this again. That's one of the great things about being human, is that we're damn smart. We'll figure this out. And I kind of think back to those World War II posters in England, keep calm and carry on. Let's keep calm, let's carry on, and it'll get better. I promise.
Yeah. I mean, I saw that news about from Pfizer that they claim that their vaccine is 90% effective. I think that's way above and beyond. What are your thoughts on that? Do you believe that statistic?
I'll believe it. I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I read the peer-reviewed journal. And I see their study data.
we know their stock prices went through the roof after they announced that. So
that's the thing. That's the thing that's so amazing. Assign some money to this and we'll do amazing things. Capitalism will triumph. Innovation will happen. But yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. And I think that
if by capitalism you mean socialism, because the government's going to give the money, so then it will actually triumph.
Yeah, but they're being motivated. They have lots of different motivators. Someone's going to get rich off this.
We had to get that in there.
But yeah,
I am hopeful. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I really hope that it's as good as they claim. I really do. Nothing would make me more happy, but the skeptic in me says, I'll believe it when I read the peer-reviewed journal and see the study data. And we'll see. There's a race between several different pharmaceutical companies. They've got a lot of smart people working on this. And I think we'll come out on top with a vaccine, and we'll see where we're at.
So I'm going to admit something that I don't tell a lot of people, and I'm just going to tell it to the podcast. But I'm a chiropractor. We come from a long line of crazy vaccine skeptics. I'm getting over that as I get older. I've become disindoctrinated, thank goodness. But I will tell, the bad rhetoric I've used in the past is that I've taken a selfish stance, and I've said, I believe, I know vaccines work. I've always said that. But I've taken a selfish stance and said, what is sometimes good for the forest is not always good for the tree. I think that's selfish. I agree with that stance. I think we have to take a more collective look at an approach at this. But if youth are thinking out there right now, if someone out there listening is thinking that's their thought process, the forest is on fire. And the way to put out the fire is to get the vaccine. So I will be the first in line. I will let them stick it in my arm, and I will tell my friends to do the same, because if we want this thing to end, and if we want Paul's life to turn back to normal, having family members with him and his patients and not going through horror, then that is what we must do. And so that's the end of my soapbox.
No, I appreciate you. I think that I tell all of my patients, especially my primary care, now is not the time to skip out on the flu vaccine. I'm just going to get on my soapbox. This year, more than ever, get your damn flu shot. We don't know what it looks like to have flu and COVID concurrently. And let's just see what the data shows when the studies are published and peer reviewed, when these vaccines come out, and let's hope for the best. And, I think it's miraculous that we're even to the point where we're in stage 3 trials. That's amazing. That's a miracle in and of itself. there's other diseases that we've been trying to develop vaccines for that we haven't gotten that far, and it's been decades. And so, yeah, I'm hopeful for the future. I'm optimistic. I'm an optimist, excuse me. And I think that we got to just keep our heads down, do what's right for each other, love each other, because what else is there? And move forward.
I love that, Paul. We're going to end on that note. Thanks so much for coming on.
He told me around here, that's a lot of federal. I troll in the block, I swear it's hard, not the middle. Or that was just a peek at what the next man doing. The situation